Oh, you need to give me permission to record.
Oh, I do.
Recording in progress.
Hello, everyone.
It's weird doing it like this.
It is. I'm not used to it.
This is not how we usually do things, so it's a bit strange. I think it's a bit weird.
Very strange. So, hi, everyone. Welcome to Crimepedia Extra. We are your hosts. I am Morgan.
Yes, and I am Cherry. Hello.
Always is the lovely Cherry.
I've still got something in my eye.
This is completely different because we don't do this for audiences, right?
No, we don't. So you can't pick your nose today.
Cannot pick my nose.
No.
And so we're live here. And why are we live?
Because it's 100 episodes.
It's 100 episodes.
It's crazy, isn't it?
It's our second anniversary.
It is, yeah.
And we are going to be joined by some lovely guests today.
Yes. Uh-oh.
And I'm going to bring in our first guest.
Press. Uh-oh.
It's one of my favorite podcasters ever.
Oh, the lovely Casey.
The lovely Casey.
Hello. Yeah.
From Cult Fault.
Hello, gorgeous. Oh, she's disappeared.
Oh, she disappeared. She decided to leave.
She's had enough of us. She's like, no.
She's like, hello, goodbye.
Off I go. Oh, we have got special today. We've got Casey on. In case you've never heard of Casey's website, it's Casey's podcast. Sorry, so I've got something in my eye. Casey has a podcast called The Cult Vault. She's got the most silkiest, amazing voice. So you can sort of relax in and listen to her horrific stories as she tells. But it's a brilliant, brilliant podcast. Very addictive. There she is.
Yay!
You did it. Oh my goodness, happy birthday, guys. This is so exciting. I'm so happy you're here. It's so nice to see you.
I feel absolutely honored that I've been asked to come and celebrate with you. What a joyous occasion. Thank you so much.
Oh, thank you for coming. It's lovely to see you. And I'm going to get to see you in like how many weeks?
I know we shouldn't. I do want to talk about it and count it down, but I don't want to upset Morgan too much because I know that of course he can't be with us, which is sad.
It's a long way to go.
Though. Yeah,
a long way to go for like one day, you know?
Yeah. It's a long way to fly. It is a long way to fly just for one day.
Oh no, like think about it. Like how many stops did I had to make to get to England, right? Well,
I had to go like via Switzerland. Was it Switzerland?
I had to go. Yeah, I went to Switzerland. So I went from Columbus to Chicago to Switzerland to Manchester. And I'm assuming it's gonna be just as bad trying to get to Scotland.
Yeah, I would think so. But it's fine because I'll have you there on the iPad like we did the first CrimeCon, and you can. Yeah. Everyone was kissing you on the screen last time. That's really funny. So I had like a picture of him. I got a big picture of him, like his really posy one that we've got, and I had that on the table, and everyone was like, "Oh, can I have my photo taken with Morgan?" And I was like, "Yeah, just don't do anything rude with him. You know, just be nice."
That is so funny. I love that. I love that.
It was lovely. So at the end of the day, I had to roll him up, put him back in his tube. Bless him. So what's new? Tell us some new stuff that you're up to.
Oh my goodness. Oh well, I don't really know where to start.
You've had so many really good episodes. You've had so many really good ones recently. I've been listening to.
Oh, it just doesn't. My interviews are booked in until February at the moment, 2023.
Amazing.
So I do 2 interviews a week. And I launch 1 episode every Friday. Occasionally, I'll have some bonus episodes because otherwise I just end up with a huge backlog of content to release. So, well, my partner's just taken over as my editor. So that's quite exciting.
Good work.
Good.
He when I started the Cult Vault is a lockdown baby. Which came out of the first wave of the UK lockdown that we had over here in England. And he decided that he was going to teach himself to do app development. So I think you two both know this already after some of our conversations down in London. But now that the podcast is picking up so much momentum, he's decided to jump on board with my project for a little while and put the app stuff on the side so that we can collaborate.
Wow.
So
That's lovely.
it's really nice. It's really nice. It's kind of like, I feel less, you know, when you come home from a day at work and you talk about all these people that your partner doesn't know, and you're like, oh, and then Shelley did this, and so did this, and they're just kind of like, well, now he kind of gets, you know, when I say a certain guest or author has agreed to come and chat on the show, he's like, oh my goodness, and I'm like, yay! So
that's nice. That's really nice.
It's great.
You can be involved.
Yeah, it's feeling good at the moment. There's a lot of stuff happening in the kind of cultiverse, as we would call it, that's quite prevalent to discuss on a whole spectrum of things, from speaking about the troubled teen industry, which is like a lot of therapeutic boarding schools over in America, and how there's been some tragic deaths of students over there through medical neglect, and actually how the states are deciding to keep those schools open. So there's that kind of thing that's happening at the moment with the show, where we're doing a lot of troubled teen coverage. But there's also a lot of stuff around independent people coming forward to say, like, oh, I was raised in a staunch Catholic household that had cult-like qualities. So then you're getting a lot of family cult environments coming through on the show. And there's just there's a ton of authors who are releasing publications that depict their experiences growing up in or joining a cult later on in life. So there really is just no shortage of content at the moment, which is kind of a bad thing in a way.
Yeah, definitely, because I didn't realize it was so prolific. You know, like, the term cult, but actually, like, you and I have talked about loads of stuff, and you think, oh my God, that's actually, like, that's a cult as well. And you just think, no, I didn't even think of it like that. So it's really interesting. There is so much of it. Yeah. And that people, like we've talked about, people are so easily duped into these things. And I was listening to your episode with, now hang on, who was it? I was listening to one of your episodes, and the guy was explaining, I think it was with Elgin, and he was explaining like how that when you're in that situation where the people that be would like separate you off from everybody else, but at the time you don't realize that you're being separated from everybody, and then all of a sudden you've got no one left to talk to other than the people that are already in this cult. And it was so interesting that because everyone always thinks I'd never be that stupid to get duped into something like that. Oh, she's gone. Oh, bless her.
No,
there she is. Oh, she's back. Okay. You know, you always think, oh, I'd never be that stupid to be duped into that. And then listening to the way he was explaining it, and I was like, yeah, you would. I can see how you would get duped into it.
Yeah.
Crazy.
It's a really interesting subject, and there's almost different things to consider in terms of, you know, when somebody says, oh, you know, I could never be convinced to join a group. And I mean, I think that after the content that's been released on my show, I've come to the conclusion that actually anybody could be. Even when, you know, when I spoke to Sarah Ferris from Conning the Con, and I spoke to her about her sister Emma and the con man that she came into contact with, they use a lot of the same tactics. So actually, and then the other thing to consider is that some people don't have a choice. There are second, third generation people born into these groups and movements that, you know, that aren't coming from a lived individual.
Keep Sweet, Obey, or Pray, that one that we watched on YouTube, like on Netflix. Like, I watched that and I was like, oh, those poor people, they grew up and didn't know certain words, they didn't know certain things, that because they just didn't know about it. So you can see how that would happen. But I mean, now I think for any of us, I think alarm bells would start ringing if somebody started using tactics like that, and would be straight on the phone. How does this sound? Does this sound a bit dodgy to you? We've got Sarah, there's loads of people we can ring up and say, sounds a bit suspicious, do you think? So I think we'd be safe at the minute.
What do you feel about some of because this is 100 episodes that you've released. Wow.
Yeah.
Oh my goodness.
I can't believe it's been 100.
That's a lot of episodes. I mean, do you feel like you've ever come close to covering a case that has cult-like qualities? Because one of the episodes of yours I listened to, I think did, and I just kind of wonder what you think
thought
about
that, didn't
that.
you?
Brittany Wood.
You thought that, Morgan, didn't you? Brittany, yeah.
Brittany
that
Wood.
would be the one that we thought, yeah.
Yeah, where it was multi-generational sex abuse.
Yeah.
Occurring. And so they grew up. This is what we're supposed to do. This is our
what
life.
we do.
And so then, the next generation pops up, and you have mothers and fathers who are passing their children off to family members because that's what happened. That was their life.
Do. Yeah.
And that's what they're expected to do. Oh, absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah, we do. Was that the same one you thought?
Yeah, definitely.
Oh, Jenny, we're gonna say hello to Brandy and hello to Jenny as well, who are listening. Hi guys.
Hi,
so
Jenny.
nice to see them. Yeah. So
that is the case that I listened to of yours that stuck out for me. It would be interesting to know the type of language that the family were using that implemented this in the first place around speaking to authorities and coaching the kids to give specific responses to any law enforcement that would come and say, are you okay? And there's like a script that they'd be expected to, to kind of give any people in positions of authority. And then probably because they were told that the treatment that they would be under with social services or child protective services, as opposed to the treatment that they were receiving from their home, would be significantly worse, which of course isn't the case. But there needs to be a common enemy within these groups, somebody to unite all of them.
They would be like the bad men, wouldn't they?
Yeah, absolutely.
They'd be the bad men that are going to take you away from home. So although what they're having at home is they don't like it and it's not very nice, it would be that, well, if you say this, then their bad men are going to come and take you away, which is exactly what happened in that Netflix documentary.
Yep.
The kids were really upset and they were being taken away from their families and they didn't understand why. And it was like, you don't realize that the life you're living is not a normal life.
Mm-hmm.
And then when you speak to the people that did actually escape, that got fed up with it and escaped, they could look back and say, no, this was horrific and it was awful. And they try and break. I mean, there was one lady who still hasn't spoken to her mum and her sister because they stayed within that cult, and she left and they stayed. And that was crazy.
Despite everything that came out, besides Warren Jeffs getting arrested.
Yeah.
Rightfully so. He's still looked at as a god to them.
Yeah. He still dictates things from his
still from prison.
And from his, the parts of his leadership that did crumble, you've just got, say that there's Christianity as the umbrella, and then branches of that come away. So if you have Mormonism as one of those branches, and then from that you've got the Latter-day Saints and the fundamentalist Latter-day Saints, the FLDS church that practices forced polygamy and, these marriages to children. You've got Warren Jeffs and his FLDS, but then from after his arrest, more sort of marginalized extremist branches break off of that as well. So even though he's not there anymore, there are other sects of the FLDS church that exist in his wake, and probably even before he was arrested as well, that practice their own versions of what they believe is the correct way to practice the FLDS faith. So, hundreds of thousands of branches of Christianity exist where one or two people interpret scripture in a certain way and then use that to justify the abuses that they put onto their followers, whether that's sexual, physical, spiritual abuse is a huge thing, because there's no identifiable physical traits of spiritual abuse that you can look at and say, wow, this person's really having their religious figurehead used against them to get them to donate all of their worldly goods to the church, or to get them to give all of their finances, or to stop them from communicating with anybody outside of this environment, which is supposed to be your all-loving community, on the conditional basis that we will love you and as long as you're a part of this group. And then if you leave, then you are then an apostate or a worldly person or a suppressive person, is what Scientology would say. So, the same same intentions behind differing culty language that's used across all of these groups. So it really is a fascinating subject. And I know that you guys know from CrimeCon that I was just like, well, in cults, actually, that looks like this just all the time. So
now, Tara, I don't know about you. So, I mean, each week we cover like horrendous cases a lot of time, right? We cover missing people, but there is something utterly just creepy about cults in general, which I can talk about disappearances, I can talk about murders, but when it comes to cults, there's something just inherently just evil and creepy about that. And it's just like I'm sitting here, like I'm getting like goosebumps just like thinking about it.
I think it's because with the cult, it's a culmination of things. There's lots of different things. You've got the sexual abuse, you've got the physical abuse, you've got the mental abuse, you've got, holding people really against their will. You've got all of these different things rolled into one. And I think that's why it's so creepy. Like when we watched that the Netflix documentary, the bit that creeped me out the most is when they went into that big, they managed to get into the big sort of building and they went upstairs and there was that like altar bit where that's where he, that's the bit that I was just like, that's just, I understand between, adults are able to choose which path they want, but when it comes to the kids, I mean, we always struggle with kids cases, always. And I think law enforcement do. I think if you speak to any detective, it's always the kids cases. You speak to any pathologist, it's always the kids cases are the ones that they're the ones that you just can never get over. And particularly the sexual abuse of kids, that's always the ones that I really struggle with. I hate those cases, and they're always the ones that I don't you don't ever forget them. You don't ever forget those ones. And I think they're normally ones I normally stay away from those. I don't normally get me doing those cases. It's always the ones that I just don't want to do. It's funny, isn't it?
You leave those to me.
You can choose those ones. I don't want to know.
It's funny, when I was speaking to a guest on my show, her name's Nicola Ranson, and she has a book coming out in the spring called A Slice of Orange. And it's a depiction of her life following Bhagwan Shree Rajneesh. If either of you have watched Wild Wild Country on Netflix.
Yep. Oh, no, I've not watched that.
Cherry. Oh, my goodness.
I haven't watched it.
Absolutely should watch that.
Okay.
It's one of the more notorious or infamous cults, because
I never even heard of those.
They built this ranch over in Oregon on this plot of land that they'd come across. So the Bhagwan Shree Rajneesh was a guru who began building a following, and he had an ashram, and then they moved from India over to Oregon when there was so many of them that they needed more space.
Okay.
And then they ended up with this piece of land, think kind of Salt Lake City before it was inhabited by anybody. When the Mormons moved over there and settled there was no irrigation, there was no power. And they had managed to engage so many different types of intellectual people from all different industries that they had people that could, they had architects and they had plumbers and they had construction workers and they had doctors, so they could have like a medical site and nobody needed to leave. And it's really interesting. Yep, absolutely. And you see that with a lot of other groups like Jim Jones and the People's Temple when they moved over to Guyana, and the tragedy that happened over there on November the 18th, 1978, which really put the word cults into the frame that we understand it today, something that's destructive, because benign cults do exist. But when there are certain coercive practices in place that abuse followers, that's when it turns into a destructive cult. So Wild Wild Country is definitely one of those documentaries to go and watch. And it really started to put awareness on the subject of cults on Netflix, because there's several documentaries that have come out since. But Nicola, she followed Bhagwan Shree Rajneesh, and she talks about that in her memoir, but she's also a psychotherapist. And I was talking to Nicola about her experiences, and I'm just looking up the episode number, but I was speaking to Nicola about her experiences, and she reached out to me one time and she said, I just want to So episode 138. So Nicola is a registered psychotherapist, and she said there is this thing called secondhand trauma, and she was like, I just want to know how you manage yourself after you have these interviews with people that have survived these really difficult experiences. And I was just like, what do you mean? And she was like, well, there is this thing that happens when you cover true crime cases, or when you speak to people that have suffered such horrible things, that actually, hi Colin.
Hi Colin.
Ladies and gentlemen.
Yeah, well,
Colin
I can
Sutton.
understand that, because you know yourself, when you do cover a case when it's particularly horrific, and one that we covered that was very, very, that we were both really upset by afterwards, was a case that where we actually interviewed the victim's mum, and that was just, it was horrific. It was horrible, and having to speak to her at her worst moment, and you know, just after it, we both come away from it and we both were like, that's the worst one we've ever done. It was awful. You know, it was
so for anyone listening, if you are, if you consume true crime at such a fast pace, secondhand trauma is actually a real thing. So we need to just be mindful that we check in with ourselves when we're covering this content, which is something I'm sure Colin knows all about.
Yeah, Colin, have you in your career, have you ever felt secondhand trauma with any cases that you had to look into or investigate?
I think personally no, but I think it's something that is obviously real, and just very, very interesting actually. I if you let me tell a story for 5 minutes, I will.
Yeah, absolutely.
Of course.
Just a few weeks ago, I was contacted by an author, or I saw an author on Twitter, was writing a book about a plane crash in the UK in 1971 where 119 people died. And I remember I was 10 years old or something at the time. And I remember that my father, as a police officer, attended it, and that he might be able to speak to the author and to help him along with it. And I had this rough idea of when I was 10 years old, of hearing him talking to my mother about it. And after he'd spoken to the author and helped him out with it, I spent some time with my dad, and I'd never seen him so cut up about something. And he said, I went to scores of fatal traffic accidents. He was a traffic cop for 30 years in London. He said, but something about that day in 1971, about the personal possessions that were scattered about in Dean, and children's toys and buckets and spades going on holiday and that sort of thing that was scattered about where all the luggage came open. And no matter how old you are and how old he is, you always see your father as being this sort of tough guy, and to see him and to realize that 50 years on, he was still living what he saw on that day as a police officer on duty. So this goes to show,
bless him.
I know, but I think things, when you do this sort of thing for a living, you kind of have to try and become hardened and a bit inured to it all. But the first time ever, I realised that something had actually got to him. Yeah.
I think you have to in that line of work. I think you have to do it. My dad was a mechanic, and he used to bring in accidents. So a lot of the time when there was fatal accidents and stuff, my dad was asked to come in to remove the vehicle. So growing up as kids, we would quite often have vehicles in our garage that had the bullet, the bullseye with, and we'd have all sorts of different bodily fluids and matter in them. It's something that we just took as that's just someone's had an accident. And then when you grow up and think back and you think, oh my God, that's horrific. But as kids, we were just like, oh yeah, somebody's had an accident. Dad's just brought the car back. And it was quite often that we had stuff like that. And I suppose you just have to kind of compartmentalize it into a box so that you don't take on that whole human kind of element of it. Because otherwise I think it would just mess your brain up, I think, after a while.
Yeah, I think you're right, Sherry. I mean, that was my way of dealing with it. I had a work world and a home world, and the two were separate, and I managed to keep them separate. So I never really suffered. But thankfully these days, not just in policing, but in paramedics and the fire service, the idea of making sure that the people that we rely upon to deal with these incidents are themselves looked after afterwards. It's something that's got quite a lot of traction, and we should all be grateful for, I think.
Yeah, definitely. Well, it's very exciting to have you on, Colin. It's made my year.
I'm sorry I'm late. We had an appointment this afternoon that I had to rush back from, but got here in time.
You did. Thank you. It's lovely to have you. Our listeners did guess though, because I did put on a little post that we've got something very, very exciting come up, and one of them put on, if she's that excited, it's got to have something to do with Colin Sutton. So they guessed, which was quite funny. So we're going to talk in our episode today. Very kind of you to come on with us. We're going to talk about one of your cases that you did, and usually we talk about unsolved ones, but we're going to talk about a solved case this time. One that we found that was crazy, because I've watched all of the I mean, you've done lots of different things, obviously your books, and then you've done the drama series with Martin Clunes, and then you've now got the Sky series, the 2 series on Sky of The Real Manhunter, which is you've done. Did you ever expect that you're going to be doing stuff like this when you were just like a normal policeman?
No. It's nice to be called normal once in a while, though. But thank you for
that. Did you say on? I started watching The Real Manhunter, and did I catch it that on one of the episodes you said you weren't interested in detective work when you first started?
Yeah, that's absolutely true. Yeah, I was really, I think possibly because my dad was a traffic cop, and he was very supportive of me being a police officer, but there was a kind of I don't know, an antipathy between traffic and CID, mostly due to drink driving laws, I think, probably, but back in the 70s and 80s. But and I didn't intend to do it, didn't want to do it. I didn't really know what I was going to do, to be honest. And it was really, I talk about it in the first book, how it happened. It literally was that I completely by accident was co-opted onto a murder squad for a couple of weeks, and suddenly thought, well, that SIO, that job, that to be there in the middle, making the decisions and having to think through everything and read everything and direct the investigation, that's just a great job. I want to do that. And at the time, it was one of those things that I could never. I'd taken a different career path. I was on a different career path, and it was an unrealistic dream in some ways, but probably backs up my feeling that you should never just ask yourself how too often, but just get on and things happen, and they did. I found my niche, and I sat in it for 10 years or so and really thoroughly enjoyed it.
I think that's quite scary as a prospect, to be in control of everything and have because you've got all your budgets and you've got your staff in and you've got then you've got this investigation. It's not always just one at a time either, is it? You've got loads of stuff going on all the time, because unlike a TV program, you don't get your DNA results back within an hour, and you don't get like evidence stuff within an hour. So it's something that lasts years, sometimes. So I think it's quite a scary prospect to say, right, you're in charge, off you go. I think, that's quite a big responsibility.
Yeah, it is, but it's, and again, when I first got handed what became the Levi Belfield investigation, I was, the very first night or early hours of the morning, I was sitting there in the garden on my own with a bottle of beer thinking, can I do this? And eventually I kind of thought, well, someone's got to, so it might as well be you.
Might as well.
Yeah, and what's the worst that could happen? You could fail, but I think, again, without being too philosophical, I think there are moments in life when some of the greatest moments in life are the ones where you have to pinch yourself and say, am I really doing this? Is this really happening? And it's not even just as, it doesn't have to be such momentous things as investigating serial murder. I mean, just from my own sort of experience, I believe it or not, I played soccer or football. So soccer for the Americans, football for the Englishmen. For lots and lots of years, a long time, and about 5 stone ago. But but when I finished, I started refereeing, and I did that for about 10 years. And
oh no,
kind of the first time I went out in that black suit with a whistle controlling a football match, it was kind of, am I really doing this? You know, is this really
you must be mad.
I was a bit mad really to do that. But I just,
no one likes a referee, do they? You always upset someone.
I know. It was when somebody said, if you're quick, you can make the opticians. I knew I'd really arrived. I was really making it. but it was, you know, I think in many ways, if you know, in life, if people stretch themselves and push themselves, first time you were sitting there doing a podcast and you switched it on and you heard yourselves doing the podcast, how did you feel about that? It's these,
oh God,
it's these events that
I don't like it now. Yeah.
But no, you know what I mean, though. It's if you don't enjoy things like that and you don't push yourself to things like that, then maybe you don't achieve what you might otherwise achieve. I guess.
Yeah.
It can be scary.
I bet it can. It's serious as well, isn't it? It's serious stuff. It's like, it's the same as when you watch like I love those surgeon programs, the brain surgery programs, because the margin of error is it's like millimeters. And I always think it's fascinating how they do brain surgery through these like eye scopes. And they're like right across the room doing this, and they've got these little scopes, and you think, oh my God. And then the guy says, well, I've got no margin for error. If I go either side of this, you know, she's going to be paralyzed. And I think, how can you go to work and do that? What if you've had like a really bad day or something and, you know, you're knackered?
Well, 18 pints and a curry the night before or something.
It's just mad. That kind of stuff I think is crazy. Yeah. I think it's really it puts to what we do, not so high pressure really when you look at jobs like that. No, it's life or death.
That was it's interesting really, you know, the two sort of cases that people talk about with me, and I suppose mean that I'm sitting here talking to you, so Belfield and then Delroy Grant. That both of them, I mean, with Belfield, you were actually living for real this idea you see in fiction and drama all the time. Like, we've got to catch him before he strikes again, you know, and that was living that for real, and that was tough. That was pressure. And yet the funny thing was about Delroy Grant, really, the strategy that we had and that we put into place actually relied upon him striking again.
Wow. Oh my goodness.
Catch him.
You know? And sometimes you have to kind of balance that and think, well, I know that means there's going to be another victim, but actually in the long run, if we don't do it that way, we're not going to catch him because that's not worked for 17 years. So perhaps we better do that, you know. They were, you know, I think looking back on it, I think that I see more pressure in it than I actually did at the time. I think at the time, it was just going to work and doing the job, you know.
Work. Yeah. And that must be crazy, especially with Belfield, because that one is, like you say, it's real time. You're like, we need to stop him before he does it. And with him, it was like, he was a nasty piece of work. And he was just, it was when I because obviously your first episode was Levi Belfield, and when you watch that and you going through it, it's like, that must have been horrendous, because I mean, he didn't really have an age bracket of women, and it wasn't really that he had a particular type that he was looking for. So it makes your job a bit harder in that you haven't got this set sort of, you know, set MO, you haven't got this set sort of person that victim that you're looking for. So with something like that must be, it shouldn't be exciting, but it must be quite an exciting kind of, you know, when you're working, it must be quite exciting to try and be one step ahead all the time.
Yeah, it is. But then if I go back into my sort of past in policing, you know, when I was working with the stolen vehicle squad and we were trying to catch people who were stealing high value cars and changing their identities, that was quite exciting. That was a good game of cat and mouse and chase.
Yeah.
Nobody was actually getting hurt. You know, the insurance companies were getting hurt, I suppose, ultimately.
Yeah.
But you know, it wasn't the same. The stakes weren't quite the same. And because you're actually dealing with lives and mostly young people's lives, that was sort of scary. I mean, we had plans in place every single time after he was charged, because he was charged with an indictment of containing 9 offences, 3 of rape or 6 of rape and 3 of assaults against 3 former partners. And that was, if you like, our holding charge that made him be remanded in custody and took him off the street. And that was never tried. That was never actually tried before a court, because we did the murder stuff and then that was just left to lie on the file. And that shows you what he's like, that an indictment like that of that seriousness and severity, with that number of millions was left. But he did make some bail applications during that time, and each time there was this huge plan in place that if some court had been misguided enough to give him bail and put him back on the streets, he was getting followed 24/7.
Oh,
because
good.
we just
Yeah.
knew he was so much of a risk. And in fact, and because I sometimes think of these batty things that are sort of a little bit, not the normal, I suppose, but I honestly suggested, why don't we just follow him around with uniformed police officers in marked cars? Because we don't care.
So it'd
actually be cheaper. I mean, we wouldn't care that he knows they're there. So we want him to know that they're there, so he doesn't do anything. But it was we can't really do that, and I guess there'd be all sorts of human rights issues and other things that I couldn't be bothered with. But no, there were plans that he presented so much of a danger that if he were to come back on the streets, he was going to be followed 24/7.
Wow.
It's mad.
Sorry, Colin, could I just ask a quick question? Sorry, I'm not too, I haven't watched The Real Manhunter, and I'm not too familiar with Levi Belfield other than the case of Millie Dowler. So I'm wondering at what point you became involved in that investigation, when you were sitting in your back garden with a beer, wondering, if you were, the person for the task, because before he was identified as the perpetrator in Millie Dowler's case, I don't know if all of the other crimes he'd committed had actually all been connected at that point.
No, it's a good question. Millie Dowler's abduction and murder took place in Surrey, so that was the Surrey police investigation. I was working in the Met, but then Amélie de Lagrange was murdered on Twickenham Green in August 2004, and that was the investigation that came to me.
Okay.
But when we started looking at that, and before we'd identified him, we realized there had been another series. There was the murder of Marshall McDonald, there was the attempted murder of Kate Sheedy, and another 3 or 4 of these kind of blitz attacks on women aged from 32 downwards down to sort of 17, within a pretty small radius, a pretty tight radius, and in a place where, one of the safest corners of London, really. And so the feeling was that there was something going on there. There was one person probably responsible. And then when we identified him, and then, my strategy always was to say, well, all those other cases had been investigated by somebody to some degree or other. Amélie was the new one. So I said, let's go with Amélie. And then if we do find a suspect and find out who he is, then let's see if we can go backwards and see if we can fit him to those other offences as well. And it was part of that process that meant that we turned up the fact that he lived very close to where Millie Dowler was abducted.
Right.
And so in touch with Surrey, and that's how eventually they came on board and, viewed him as their suspect and stuck with it for a long time before they eventually charged him. So I kind of, on that first night, my thinking was, we've got one here one murder we're investigating, but I know there were another 2 in the background and a number of attacks that probably were the same person. So, it's really within the first 12 hours, we realized that what we were dealing with was something, away from the usual run of the mill of things, I suppose.
Oh my goodness.
Amelie's one was awful. When Amelie's parents came and I just thought that just sent shivers up my spine. That was a really sad. I know they're all really awful and really sad, but Amelie's in particular, for some reason, that was the one that I just thought, oh my God, her parents are in a different country, and to have that phone call, that just must have been awful for them. And then to come over here and
they were just the most wonderfully dignified people. And her father had a heart attack, had to give up work. They came over for the entire trial, and mum got struck down with some sort of eye infection that, whether she was susceptible due to the stress, whatever, I don't know. Fortunately, we took her we managed to shortcut the circuit and took her into Moorfields and explained who she was, and they dealt with her there and then on the day. I mean, they were fabulous. But yeah, they were just, and Belfield had the gall to call them scum in the courtroom. Not while the jury were there or the judge, obviously.
No, of course not. Yeah.
Because he was doing that, and he was just looking at them, and those looked back at him, and he said something. Well, who are you looking at? You're just scum, you are, something like that. And you just.
I mean, hasn't he just put in an application to get married as well?
Yeah.
How bloody ridiculous is that?
I don't think it's going to happen.
Who would bloody marry him? That's mental.
I know.
It's crazy.
But you have to say, the number of statements that I read from women that said, my name is so-and-so. During 2002 to 2003, I had a short relationship with Levi. And you're looking at all these statements saying that, you're thinking, not being funny, but how? Why?
Why? That's right. Why?
Yeah. But there's no doubt he was a charmer in many ways. And he probably, he probably needed to have the appropriate receptive person to charm. But he'd also got away with
of course,
charming police officers and charming courts over the years. And this he'd come up smelling a rose every time. What I will say is, as a quick sort of, just a quick plug, but I won't go into it too far. But there's an awful lot more about him and about what he did during his life that has yet to come out. And we're starting shooting the film that's going to tell you all about that in the middle of September.
That's exciting. That's very exciting stuff.
And it goes away into areas, I say, that the people have touched on. They know he was involved in sort of grooming and paedophilia, things like that. But we've got the means now to go into it and to look at questions around the murder, look at questions around the Chillingdon murders and whether that's viable, and all sorts of things like that. And I'm doing it with Joe Brunt and a couple more of my old team, the Leach brothers.
That's nice.
So we started filming that middle of September. So that's I think that's
I like
quite
those two. I like those brothers.
Yeah,
I think they look like they'd be quite a good laugh. You could imagine being in the pub with them, couldn't you, on a Saturday night? They seem like really nice guys, I think.
I can confirm that is true. Yeah. It's a little bit of a departure because what we did, why I was so pleased to do The Real Manhunter, and we started off obviously with all my cases, and now, like the one we're going to talk about, that we went into cases that other people have done because I ran out, because although I did 10 years of it, they're not all story worthy, shall we say? And that seems to have worked, and the viewing numbers have been just they've been better for the second series than the first one. So Sky want the third series, which we're just signing up to do.
Congratulations! That's brilliant.
Yeah, but part of what else we're doing is other things, and we've just finished doing this reinvestigation of some murders in the 1970s, which was great fun and very exciting, and we made some progress with, and we're now doing this Belfield one, and the Real Manhunter was really what I wanted to do, was to kind of showcase the investigation, the detective work, and the effect it has on the family and communities and things, rather than focusing too much on the actual events of the crimes and the perpetrators, because I thought that a lot of true crime TV perhaps doesn't get that balance where I'd like it to be. We're kind of departing that for a bit with the Belfield film, because we are talking about him, but I'm kind of justifying it to myself on the basis that people already know he's a vile, horrible, dangerous human being. But believe me, you don't know the half of it.
They got no idea. Yeah,
I think it's worth telling that story. So that's why we're doing that. Yeah.
If you're talking about sort of the things that he was doing that maybe the public aren't too aware of as well, when I talk about sort of cult leaders and cult victims, it's almost like trying to highlight some of the symptoms of grooming that we might be able to actually recognize in our everyday lives as well. So maybe if Belfield had decided to rally a group of devout followers, he sounds like he was quite a charismatic person. Perhaps he could have been a cult leader in another life, or you could even argue that he was one in some ways.
Yeah. I'd agree, Kelly. The interesting thing is, if you looked at the people who he had working for him doing his car clamping, they were vulnerable in most cases. He kind of chose people that he knew he would be able to influence, and that would sort of follow and do what he said without question, and that he could rely on in that sense. And also, if you look at the various sort of life partners that he had over the years as well, and some of those, educated women, very strong-willed women in a couple of cases, and yet they fell under this total control that he managed to exercise over them. So I think there's kind of traits and things there that work in towards looking at a cult. You know, I think I agree with you. He could easily have been a cult leader. Yeah.
Mad. Well, excited. I look forward to watching that then. That'd be really interesting, I think.
I hope so. Yeah. It'd be fun to
I'm
make.
sure yeah. It'll be good. It'll be good to make.
Yeah.
It'd be interesting.
Yeah.
We do have a comment from one of our viewers. Hannah says, I was living in that part of town when all of this was happening. This is Colin, of course. Thank you for taking him off the streets. It was scary. It was a scary time. So thankful you made us safe. That was from Hannah.
Oh, that's really nice.
That's nice, Hannah. Do you know, I mean, my daughter, I mean, we live just into Surrey, just outside London. My daughter was 16 coming up when it started. God. And I used to go and pick her up from the kind of teenage discos and things like that, you know, and you'd see all these young girls coming out. And this was after he was locked away on remand. And I used to sit there thinking to myself, you don't know how much safer you are now than you were weeks ago, you know.
So what do your kids think of all this? Because obviously you've been, you know, a police officer for such a long time. It's just normal work for you. But now, what do they? Because if someone came up to you, like, I don't know, 5 years ago and said, "Oh, my dad's Colin Sutton," people would go, "Oh, okay." But now, if they came up to you and said, "My dad's Colin Sutton," people would be like, "Oh my God, that's so exciting!" So how do they see all this? Because you're just dad to them.
Yeah, I think I am largely. I mean, what's my son's a police officer in London.
Yeah, he is, isn't he? Yeah.
And he got promoted to sergeant back in March of this year, and they have like a meeting where the new sergeants come along and meet the senior leaders, and you know he WhatsApped me and he said, quoting him really, he said, "One of the chief inspectors outed me as your son, and after that." All they wanted to talk about was Levi Belfield, and because he's working at Twickenham.
Okay. Oh, yeah.
Yeah. And as a result of that, I've ended up going in. I've done one. I'm going to do some sort of talks to his colleagues on that area of the Met, which is nice. It's nice to get back involved with them. So, yeah, you know, he's. I think he kind of. I told him when he joined, you know, it's not a competition with your friends or your family to get to a certain rank or achieve anything or do anything. You know, the best thing you can do is to do a good job wherever you like doing a good job. And I hope I did when I found the job I really wanted. And it might take you 2 years to find that, or 10 years or 20, I don't know. But, you know, that's what you need to do. So I don't think he doesn't feel any pressure about him, because he's not a detective. He's just doing, he's on the response team at the moment. I don't think there's that kind of, he doesn't feel that kind of pressure to come up to scratch or any comparisons with me any more than I did with my dad, I suppose.
It must be quite cool for him though. It must be quite cool to go in work and be like, "My dad's Colin Sutton." It's quite cool.
Yeah. He quite, you know, he I don't know. He'd never say that to me, that it was quite cool. You know, we got a really well.
Really?
But he'd always play it low key. But he does, you know, fair play to him. He does sort of always tell me when, "Oh, I met so and so who knows you," or "so and so said this," or whatever. So yeah, he's seems quite happy with it. And he was very pleased.
You know, at school.
Sorry?
They're go on.
I say what was good was when we did the script for the Night Stalker drama, Martin Clunes drama. Do you remember the chase scene where there's a Delroy Grant had committed a burglary and the woman had heard him and she's on the phone to the police and and then he grabs the phone from her and runs, and the police car comes around the corner and the PC gets out and chases, and I wrote that scene because sort of how chases work and how the radio works and what happens is kind of something that isn't often got right in dramas, and I wanted us to get right, so I did. And I lent on Joe a bit with that and sort of said, "Oh, does it still happen like this?" And there's just, you know, is the dialogue. And as a reward for that, the PC's number that comes up on the board and that he gives on the radio when he's chasing is actually Joe's shoulder number. So I
that's
kind of
amazing.
immortalised him in Night Stalker by putting his number in.
Brilliant.
Because he's changed now. Now as Sergeant, he gets a different number, but that was his number.
Yeah. That's so cool, though. That's really cool.
He liked it. And I told him, I sent him a screenshot of it. And he said, "That's really good." He said, "But you do know I am 10 for 10 on foot chases, and I'd have caught the best."
I'd have had him, yeah.
Now, Colin, you're in a position now where, young police officers, young detectives can look up to you, right? As something they want to, how they want their careers to go. When you were getting started in police work, in detective work, was there anyone that you looked up to?
In policing generally, the person I looked up to is sadly no longer with us, but in a really strange way that these things work, my best friend from when I was 10 years old, who's still my best friend, although he lives abroad now, I don't see him very much. His father was a police officer and was in fact my first boss, my first chief superintendent when I went to Tottenham. And he had what I think probably now would be termed a very old-fashioned and disciplined attitude towards how policing should be done.
Yeah.
And that had quite a big impact on me. And I spent time with him going on sort of family holidays and things like that, because we sort of interchanged with our families like you do with your best friend. So I'd known him, Peter, for 10, 12 years when I joined, and had spoken to him quite a lot as I got older. So he was somebody who had quite an influence on me. But Dad did really, although he was a dyed in the wool PC, and he was a traffic officer and then a driving instructor at the driving school. That's what he did. But he gave me some pretty good advice about all sorts of things. One of which I passed on to Joe, and that was to take any and every training opportunity you're given, because you can never be overtrained, even if it sounds really dull. And I don't want to do that. Just take it, because one day you'll be pleased to have it. And I did that, and Joe's doing the same. Yeah.
That's really nice. That's a really good piece of advice generally, though, to be honest, to take as much teaching and as much learning as you can do, because you never know when you're going to need it. That's a really good piece of advice.
It was but when I became a detective, I just went into I got there by a very circuitous route, shall we say. I was never a detective constable. I was never a detective sergeant. I wasn't a detective until I was an inspector, and that was only because there were no promotions for about 4 years in the Met. And so some of us who'd been on a particular scheme that I was on, they said, "Well, you can't get promoted for the next 4 years. Do you fancy doing something a bit different to your normal job?" And I sort of said, "Can I be a detective, please?" And I said, "Yeah, if you like." And that was it. And that's how I got into it. Yeah, and in some ways that was because I hadn't trodden that traditional purple path and gone through the difficulties and learning the craft, I suppose, like lots of others had. It was a bit difficult, caused me a few difficulties at the start, here and there. But you just, 2 eyes, 2 ears, 1 mouth. It's always that when you're learning something, isn't it?
Yeah, and I don't think it ever really leaves you either. And when we've spoken to retired policemen and we've spoken to other retired detectives and stuff, I think it's one of those things that never goes away. A friend of mine, she's a retired detective, and she goes back now because they do it. They're having, like, obviously civilian. She's now going back to help out because there's not enough staff. So she's now going back and doing that. And she's nuts. You'd never in a million years think that she was law enforcement of any kind. She's mental, and she loves it. And like she said to me, it will never go. She said it will never leave you. She said it never. It's just a way of life. She said those instincts that you have and the that nature that you've got. She says it never goes away. You never get rid of that.
No, I think that's right.
Isn't it? Nice.
Yeah, my dad's 85. I had to go with him to buy a new car about 3 weeks ago, which was quite amusing. He decided he needs an electric car because he doesn't go very far and it'll be cheaper. So,
fair enough.
Fair enough. And I drive him up to go to the car dealers, and he's just spotting things. He said, "It's like hunting without a gun, I said, "You've been retired 40 years. You ought to, nearly 40 years. You ought to understand that now." But it never does.
Bless him. That's lovely.
Yeah.
Okay, so Morgan, what do you want to do? Do you want to crack on with our case, or what do you want to
transition to the episode? Yeah,
can do.
Casey, you're more than welcome to stay with us.
Give me 2 seconds.
Yeah, I'm going to open a window. I'm really, really warm in here.
Go ahead.
I'd love to stick around if that's okay,
Yeah,
and just kind of listen in. As I just said in the chat there, my partner's home with them. We've got 2 kids in the house, so a 2-year-old and a 1-year-old. So I'll probably just stay on mute and whilst he does the bedtime routine. Otherwise, everyone will just be listening to our teething 1-year-old and our defiant 2-year-old who is reluctant to go to bed any time of the day.
I think you don't really want to stay, Casey. It's just that it's a better alternative, I think. That's
Well, now that you say it that way.
Now, listen, it's hard work, but it's you wouldn't have it any other way, would you?
No, it's funny because people are always saying, why did you start the podcast after your child was born? Why didn't you think to do it before? Why didn't you wait until they were a bit older? And I'm just like, well, some of us are just gluttons for punishment.
Yeah.
Some of us just, take every opportunity, as you said, and then occasionally things happen that change the entire trajectory of where you are and where you're going. And so I think it's the same with podcasting as well. You start a podcast with an idea of what you think it's going to be. And then a few episodes in, you're like, this is absolutely nothing like what I thought it was going to be.
I can imagine. Yeah.
It's a bit like that.
All right.
Okay, I'm all done now. Got the dog in.
Okay. Do you want me to just do our beginning? Do you want me to start it, and then we'll do introductions, and then we'll do the beginning like normal.
Okay.
All right, here we go.
Ready when you are.
This is so weird. It's like,
I know it's weird having people here.
Yeah, people here, and then people are watching. So people are going to learn really quick that I do a lot of edits when in our episodes. All right.
Okay.
Here we go. Welcome to Crimepedia. I am your host, Morgan, and with me, as always, is my favorite true crime bestie. It's a lovely Cherry. Hello, Cherry. How are you?
Hello. I'm good, thank you. Very, very good, thank you. I'm very excited for this week's episode. It's our 100th episode. It's our 2nd anniversary. Can't believe we've done 100 episodes.
I know. It just seems like yesterday we started this.
I know, it's crazy. So we've got some very, very special guests with us for this week. Your favorite person in the world and my favorite person in the world. So It's very exciting. So we've got Casey from the Cult Vault with us. Hello, Casey.
Hi, I'm very excited to be here. Thank you for letting me come along to celebrate your birthday.
Thank you for being here. And then we've also got the lovely Colin Sutton with us as well.
Hello, it's absolutely great to be with you. I'm really pleased. I thought it was meant to be a surprise for you, Cherry, actually, but
it was.
It was.
It was supposed to be a surprise, but then he said, well, it's probably a good idea I tell you now, because otherwise you'll be really, really excited, and then you just be a bit excitable. So I've had time to get my excitement out the way, and so be a bit professional.
Yeah, I figured.
So this week's case we're going to do is a bit different, isn't it? It's a bit different to normal. We usually do unsolved cases, cases that we might be able to help a little bit with. But seeing as we've got the godfather of true crime with us today, we are going to do one of his cases, which is from his new season, the 2nd season of the Sky series, The Real Manhunter. So if you don't know Colin, where have you been? He is a former detective chief inspector and a senior investigating officer for the Metropolitan Police in London. So if you're from America, we always say on our show, we've got Colin Sutton, America has got Paul Holes. So that's the way we kind of explain to people who Colin Sutton is for America. He's our Paul Holes over here, which is Paul Holes is just over there. It was crazy walking around the CrimeCon when we went to CrimeCon. He had like security around him and no one could get near him. But then when he came to England, he was just there, cup of coffee, stood up chatting to everyone. But it was so different.
Was there bourbon in that coffee cup?
Yeah. He he was the man that first raided the minibar during the great blackout at the hotel in London.
Oh, that was just the craziest weekend I think ever.
Yes,
It was mad. Yeah, it was really mad.
I should say actually that the case that we're going to talk about, it was one of mine in the sense I did it in Real Manhunter, but it wasn't one I investigated.
Yes.
It's one of the ones we're now doing that we're looking. We're trying to use the same techniques and the same principles, but talk only to people who are actually involved. But their cases, and it opens it up for us to go throughout the country and to deal with some really sort of interesting cases as well. So, you know, we're going to do a third series that's going to be all like that.
Yeah, I mean, when we were looking at what we wanted to talk to you about, obviously everybody knows you from the Levi Belfield case and also the Delroy Grant case. Both of your books, you've got 2 books out, The Night Stalker, obviously Delroy Grant, and then Manhunt, How I Brought Serial Killer Levi Belfield to Justice. And so we thought, well, because always everybody talks to you about those ones, we thought it might be quite nice that you might be able to talk about something a bit different for a change, because you always get questions about that one. And the one that we picked was one that was it was a bit of a shocking one, because Morgan managed to get the Real Manhunter to watch over there, and it's quite a shocking one, this one, because the offender is so young, and for such a violent crime, and for it to be such a young child, really, and that's why we wanted to pick this one. And this one, if you have got Sky, you can watch this. It's in the 2nd season, and you can watch the whole episode about it where Colin talks, and also the detectives that were on the case also talk about it as well. So it's a really interesting one.
I think it goes on Acorn, or it may not be there yet, but it will be on Acorn in the US. Yeah,
season 1 is currently on, and that should be season 2 coming up hopefully soon.
Excellent. And we've got season 3 on its way, did you say? Got another one on its way?
Yeah, we've just literally got the email saying, oh, yes, we'd like another one, please. So when we're going to do it, I don't think we'll start filming it now until the start of next year. So it'll probably be next summer before it's out. But yeah. Excellent.
Okay, so the case that we're going to talk about today is the case of James Apfield and Nahid Almenia. And on the 29th of March 2014, James Apfield was 33. He was known to some of his friends as Jim, and he had a car accident in which he had sustained some brain injury when he was a bit younger, and this made him he was a very vulnerable person. It gave him a lot of challenges in the fact that there was lots of things that he would do that weren't particularly normal. He would drink in his local pub every evening, but he had children, and he was well liked by a lot of people. A quiet guy who was pretty much harmless, really. It didn't seem to, there was very many people that had anything bad to say about him at all. And on the 28th of March 2014, James had left his local pub that he was drinking in and walked through this area called Castle Park in Colchester in Essex. And I was funny because I looked into Castle Park, and it actually does have a castle in it as well. So there's this castle at the top of like a hill, and then so there's a park. It's quite a big park area, and then there's a river and there's a lake that is in this park as well. So it's got a massive area, and he was seen by a witness laying down in the grass. So obviously he's had a few drinks in the pub, and he's gone through this park for whatever reason and has laid down in this park in the grass. And there's quite good CCTV in this area. So police were able to look on the CCTV. And at 5:45 in the morning, the next morning, James was found on the towpath by the river, and he had been stabbed 102 times. This is a horrific attack on this guy. And he was actually alive when he was found.
So real quick, where he was seen lying on the grass, that's not where he was found after he was stabbed. No. Is that correct?
No, that's right.
Okay. And real quick, what kind of area is this in Colchester?
I can tell you a little about it. It's I mean, Colchester itself is obviously a very, I think it's England's oldest town, and it's a military town as well. There've been over the years barracks there, and so the town centre is quite busy, but it's actually essentially a kind of suburban town or city, or maybe a small city, is it? I don't know. And where this castle park is, it's got lakes in it, it's got a river through it, it's got housing, kind of modern housing towards the edge of it as well. And then on one side of it, there's like a shopping area and a cinema and a bowling alley or something like that. So it's pretty kind of, when I went down there and we were filming for it, and I was quite surprised at how busy it was. It's not, it looks, if you look just at the pictures, it looks pretty rural and like it would be pretty quiet, but it's actually not. It's actually very well used because you've got this housing nearby and all these other sort of attractions nearby to it.
But so it sounds like to me, this is not a type of area where you'd expect to find violent crime.
No.
To this extent. Okay.
No.
Not at all. Not at all. No.
I mean, I think they had more like, I think they were like more like normal stuff like drug activity and stuff like that, but nothing horrendous like, you know, somebody being stabbed like to that sort of capacity. So when he was found, he was still alive. Unfortunately, he did pass away at the scene. And the police started their preliminary investigations and found out that at 1 a.m. that morning, a passerby had seen him in the park and had asked him, like, you know, are you okay? And he said, yes, I'm fine. So we know that he was okay and everything was all right at 1 o'clock. And then obviously he was found at 5:45. So that gives us this window of like 4 3/4 hours or whatever for when this could have happened. So it appeared that there was no motive for this. I mean, he was well liked. He had a good family. He had a good support system. He didn't seem to have any enemies at all. And it's obviously being stabbed that many times is quite a savage, horrific attack. And the police sort of didn't have anything at the time to go on for any reason why this would have happened. Like you said, it's not the sort of place that you would expect this kind of thing to happen. So the police sent out EFITs and released parts of the CCTV out to the public. And also Crime Watch did a segment on their show about it, and then did another segment as well to try and keep it sort of in the public's mind, because it's a pretty savage attack that everybody locally would then. Is that your doorbell?
Yes.
Your front doorbell. Oh, God. So there was no real nothing came of the tips that came into the police, and there was a few leads that were generated and a few arrests that were made, but nothing really actually happened at the time. So Colin, when you have something like this, where it just seems to be like a complete random attack, what's the police's sort of first port of call? What do you do when something like this comes in?
Well, there are a number of sort of things you do in parallel. And I mean, as you say, you know, these days, of course, CCTV is always the thing, but if you're in the middle of a park, you're probably not going to have it there and then, but you have it on the outskirts. So that was done. You have to enlist, even, you know, when we were in the Met and we had quite a lot of officers and quite a concentration of people and of CCTV, it was still difficult enough, and you have to enlist the eyes and ears of the public. If you transplant that out into a county, into Essex, where you've got far fewer inhabitants, but also far fewer police officers as well. You know, I think one of the things that impressed me with the investigation here is that the good use that they did make of local media outlets and publicity and press appeals and media appeals. And you'd also look at, you know, you mentioned there, Cherry, that there was some arrests made. You do also look at the kind of, you know, round up the usual suspects. No, I don't mean that, but you kind of look at who in the area. You know, have you got people who live nearby who are not in prison, who are out, who have been convicted of knife crime, of serious assaults, you know, and that's often where those sort of initial arrests will come from, where you find somebody like that who you can't eliminate, and they can't eliminate themselves because they don't have an alibi or they weren't somewhere else, and so that happens there. So yeah, I mean, it's these, I always say this, you know, the reason that the detection rate is so good for murder is because most murders are committed by people who are known to the victim and who aren't thinking about how they might get caught when they commit the murder. And so if you throw enough resources at it, which fortunately we still do and are still able to, then with lots of police officers, lots of forensic scientific work, you will solve it. It's that small percentage, and it might only be, you know, 2, 3, 4% at the edge of murders that are premeditated and where there's absolutely no connection between the assailant and the victim, and where you've got nothing else, like in this case, because there's no CCTV and there aren't the eyewitnesses. They're the tough ones. They're the really difficult ones. They're the ones that you know, when you're taking the one, you take a gulp and think this is gonna be tough.
Well, I mean, we had, so 3 months after this happened, so that sort of case there, that there was nothing really very much going on with it for the police. And 3 months later in June at the Salary Brook Nature Reserve. Now, this is like a trail, Morgan. This is a bit like, like the Appalachian Trail that we talked about. This is kind of but on a much, much smaller scale.
Okay.
This is a nature reserve also in Colchester. And there was a 31-year-old Saudi Arabian girl called Nahid Almania, and she was on her way to college at the University of Exeter, where she was a student. Again, she was another popular person, very kind, very gentle, no known enemies. And she was walking along the Salary Brook towpath there.
Real quick, you messed up.
Essex, not Exeter.
Essex. It's Exeter.
Did I say Exeter?
Yeah, you did.
Oh, did I? Oh, sorry. Oh, well, sorry. We'll start that again then. So did I say it was University of Essex? Where did I mess it up? I'll start again.
She was on her way to college at University of Essex.
Essex. That was what I said. You need me to say that again?
Yeah, so just say 31-year-old Saudi Arabian.
Oh, okay. So she was a 31-year-old Saudi Arabian lady called Nahid Almania, and she was on her way to college at the University of Essex, where she was a student. Now, she was, again, a very gentle, kind person. She had no known enemies, and she was walking along Salary Brook, which is an isolated footpath. So it's kind of, I don't think when I was looking at the pictures of it, it's not really overgrown, but it's one of those places that I probably wouldn't want to walk down by myself. But a lot of people did walk along that area, and her body was found at 10:30 in the morning, and she had been stabbed 16 times. Obviously not as many as James, but equally as horrific. And obviously it was fatal, and unfortunately she lost her life as well. Now, again, looking at the similarities between the two scenes, this is another huge scene. There's a lot of people using the area. There was a university to one side. There was a housing estate nearby as well. And so there is clear similarities between the two murders, but there were also some huge differences between the murders. Obviously, you've got one male, one female. One has got horrific, lots of stab wounds. The other one's got a lot less stab wounds. And it happened at a different time of day. One was early hours of the morning. The other one was like 10:30 in the morning she was found. And so when you look at things like this, people are then starting to worry that there's a serial killer on the loose. And because this is covered in the news and it was all over the news, and police are advising people to think about where they travel and don't travel alone and that kind of stuff, but trying not to create some sort of hysteria, which it kind of does. So when you have cases like this, Colin, what kind of problems does this give the police when you've got now got two murders in an area that doesn't usually have murders? What kind of problems does this give you?
I mean, there's a number of issues. First, you've got that balance between using and having to use the general public as your eyes and ears and trying to get information from them, and not making them frightened to go out, not saying, not imposing a curfew almost by overstressing the danger. You've also got a very kind of technical difficulty for the investigators, and that is that when you hear about linked offences, and you will only really formally link an offence if you've got either DNA or a fingerprint that proves that the assailant was the same person. Because technically, the way the database works, if you link them, somebody who's eliminated from one has to be eliminated from the other. And if they're not linked and you do that, you risk losing your proper suspect. So unless you've got that, and they didn't have that at first, you've then got this issue. And we had it with Belfield, and the way we dealt with it was by inventing this thing we called a linked investigative series, which was something we made up. But what we essentially were saying was that these two crimes are so similar and in such a similar area and such a similar method that we think it makes perfect sense for the same team to investigate them both. But we're not saying that they're linked. And of course, by saying that, you kind of then hype up the media thing even more, because, oh look, there's a serial killer on the loose, and all of a sudden it sounds worse. But as I said, I talked about before, there's a reality of living this dramatic sort of device of, oh God, when's he going to strike again? And these officers had that there. They'd had the first one, which was horrific. They'd had the second one, which was equally horrific. And yes, there were differences between them, but they're thinking, well, this is Colchester. This sort of thing doesn't happen. It doesn't happen once, let alone twice. So, it really feels them. And Essex Police are a provincial police force. They've got, an eighth of the numbers, a tenth of the numbers of the men to deal with. And this turned into one of their biggest, if not their biggest ever investigation.
With the second victim, was it ever considered to be related to race in any way, with her being Saudi Arabian?
I don't think it was, but there was a sensitivity around that, and as I know myself, when you're dealing with victims from foreign countries, then you have to make sure that the liaison with those countries are correct and done. It does add another dimension of difficulty. I think it was the fact that she was obviously a Muslim lady that had been murdered was something which the officers had to have in mind and bear in mind that could be part of the motive, and therefore you then open up another can of worms in some ways as looking at who might have done it and what their reasoning might have been. And then that takes you away from the first murder because they're so different. And it's really, really tough job for them.
And obviously there wasn't any concrete evidence either on either of the crime scenes that it was a particular person. There was some DNA found on the second murder. There was some DNA found, so they did at least have some DNA that they could then use. The police looked to see if there were any offenders that lived in the Colchester area that had the same MO as this offender. Like Colin said earlier, they basically went out and looked at anybody that had anything in their sort of arrest history where it was violent crime, knife crime, anybody that wasn't in prison at the time, anybody that was out. And this ended up with them having 70 people who were then called in to be interviewed on suspicion, for this. So, 70, that's crazy. That's a lot of people to have in. This led them to a 15-year-old boy, and he is a boy. I'm not going to call him a man because he's a boy. He's 15 years old, and he's a guy called James Fairweather. Now, he had been convicted of knife point robbery in a shop in January of that year. And so he then was brought in. He was interviewed, and he denied having any involvement in these murders. He was at home at the time, didn't have anything to do with them.
So basically, if I'm getting this right, of these 70 people, they looked at people that had committed crimes with knives. Is that how I'm hearing that?
Yeah.
So
people that had the same. Yeah.
So
I think they might. They may not all have been convicted of crimes with knives. I think there would be. You'd look at intelligence reports as well of people carrying knives and possibly using. But yeah, essentially that. People with links to knives, should we say?
Yeah.
I want to go back real quick. With the lack of DNA as a police officer, does that indicate to you that this was not this was an attack that surprised the victim and possibly not involving someone that she would have known? So it's not a domestic violence situation where I would see if it was a familiar attack, if it was domestic violence, you would assume that there would be some physical aspect to it which would allow DNA to be on the victim. But in this case, since there's no DNA, does that tell you that this was something that came out of the blue?
Yeah, it's what we sometimes refer to as blitz attacks. Really, that it is possible. It's more difficult with a stabbing than it is with a blunt instrument attack a la Belfield, because stabbing, you've got the chance of kind of cross contamination of blood and so forth, more so than with a blunt instrument attack. But yeah, if you've got a typical kind of a fight, if you like, where the parties are known to each other in some way, then the chances are that there's been some kind of cross DNA touching beforehand that might turn up. Okay. If you've got absolutely nothing at all, it's more likely to be a blitz attack. Yeah.
Okay.
And also, like an attack like that with a knife, that's usually like a pretty personal attack. Somebody, you having to get up really close to somebody to be able to use a knife on them. So it's quite a savage attack on somebody. I mean, if you're fighting and the person sort of is aware that you're coming at them, it's a bit different to if they're just surprised like this. And a knife is a pretty savage way of doing that. And I'm surprised that there wasn't more DNA, because quite often they cut themselves, don't they, in instances like that. And so you're quite likely to get a DNA profile from something like that. But obviously this was a really long, slow investigation, because there wasn't really anything that the police had to go on. They did do a media campaign asking the public, again, like Colin said, getting out and asking the public for help. There was a witness that said that they saw a man on the nature reserve the morning that Naheed was killed, and he was wearing this like I always think it sounds like a donkey jacket, but it's like a leather distinctive leather Italian jacket, and it's like trying to describe what kind of thing it looked like. It was like sandy color, almost like a sandy color jacket, but it was very distinctive. And I love in the actual episode, I love the analogy that your investigation is like a pyramid. And I think this was one of the detectives that was on the case said, he said, basically you have to close off every line of inquiry as you go up this pyramid, and you just narrow it down until you get to the top. And that's the person, because that's the last resort that you've got. And I love the way he described it like that, because that's a really good way of looking at it.
Yeah.
There was so many lines of inquiry for this. And they even had some officials that came over from Saudi Arabia to discuss the case with Essex Police as well. So even they got involved in this. And something else that was pointed out in the episode was that it was such a huge operation that money is also a factor. It costs a lot of money to run an investigation like this. And obviously it shouldn't come down to money, should it? But realistically, it does have to, because it does cost money.
Yeah, it does. And perhaps having had the sort of luxury of doing most of my major crime investigation in the Met, it never really was too much of a problem. We had a budget. I had a budget I had to stick to, but you could normally find some more money if you needed kind of scientific work done that was going to be expensive. Then it could be found, and I think that's still the case. You know, most forces have contingency funds and things, and something like this is not going to be written off for the sake of spending money.
Yeah.
Where it does come in is again the poor old SIO's there, and that's his or her problem. You know, and if you end up spending thousands or hundreds of thousands of pounds on something which doesn't work essentially, and someone might be asking you questions at the end of it, and that's a worry. But I think even these days people can still be relatively confident that if there's a murder, then something needs doing, it gets done.
That's good. That's really good. It's nice to know that, isn't it? So this case carried on, and so it wasn't until the following year, and it was on the 26th of May 2015, the police finally got a breakthrough in the case, and a woman was walking along the Salary Brook Trail, and she saw this young guy acting a bit strangely by the bridge that's there. He then hid in the bushes. So straight away she's thinking, this is a bit weird, like what's he doing? And this is very close to the area where Naheed was killed. Now, he was wearing a very similar Italian style leather jacket, similar to one that the victims and that the people the witnesses had reported seeing him wearing the morning of Naheed's murder. So this woman got really spooked by this guy and turned around and went back the other way and met a friend who was walking her dog. So they went down together to see if he was still there, and he was. So they phoned police, and luckily there was a local police officer who was literally 3 minutes away from where they were. He went straight down there, talked to this guy, and this asked him if he had anything on him, and he did. He had a knife on him, and he had a pair of rubber grip lock gloves. So obviously not the sort of thing you usually carry around. It's a bit suspicious with that kind of thing. And so they arrested him on the spot. They took him into custody. And that man was James Fairweather, the 15-year-old boy that we were talking about earlier.
Well, sorry, Cherry, what time of the day was this where he was hiding in the bushes?
This was in the morning. I believe she was walking through that area. So this is like broad daylight.
Wow, okay.
Yeah, it's a bit crazy, isn't it? And so obviously
I think that's really just strangely. An interesting detail. Yeah, just kind of really. Yeah. Oh, okay.
but just waiting there. He's just waiting there in the bushes. And then that makes you kind of think, okay, well, what was he waiting there for? Because at this moment, she doesn't know who he is. She doesn't know where he's from. The police don't know who he is. They don't know where he's from either when they get there to speak to him. But obviously what he's carrying isn't normal. And so they arrest him and take him into custody. Now, as soon as he was in custody, he started admitting to these murders. And his interrogation video, when I watched it, is quite chilling because he literally just talks about it matter of factly, just like we're chatting. He talks about it just like it's a normal thing, and he explains exactly how he carried out both of the murders. He even stood up at one point and is demonstrating what he did. But you've got to remember, in all of this, he's a 15-year-old child, so he's actually, in the terms of law, he's a child. So what I was going to ask you, Colin, when you have something like this, I mean, obviously these is horrific crimes, not just one, but we've got two. When you've got a child involved, what problems does that bring you then?
Yeah, it means that you have to have somebody, an adult, an appropriate adult by law there with them while they're being questioned, while they're being, if they have any sort of intimate samples taken, things like that. But, police officers are used to that because for lesser crimes, it's the same. The fact that it's murder makes it no different. It's the same.
Right.
There's a skill certainly to interviewing generally that would cause issues with. You have to pick the right people to do the interviewing. That wasn't really an issue in this case because James Fairweather just, the thing that upset him, I think, was that he'd been stopped before he could kill more, not that he'd been caught. He almost wanted to be caught. It was part of the... I don't know, part of what he had embarked upon, part of how he wanted to make a name for himself was to be this serial killer. And he'd been stopped after only two. I mean, it's interesting, isn't it? I don't want to get too sort of political with a small p but there's a lot of stuff around saying, should young people, legal children be searched? Should they be tasered? Should they be, and the fact is that a 15-year-old with a knife is just as dangerous as a 25-year-old with a knife.
Yeah, exactly.
There's no kind of way of telling it. I do say to people, the worst. Thankfully, I wasn't assaulted very much while I was on duty in 30 years. But the worst assault
very much.
No, well, but a lot of people get it a lot worse than me. They put it that way. But the worst assault I did suffer was from a 14-year-old girl. So
Oh, girl as well.
She was actually handcuffed at the time, but anyway, she used her feet, and we won't go into it as to where they landed, but it was very painful. But that's so it's you can't make these kind of blanket decisions saying he's a 15-year-old, therefore he can't be capable of the utmost evil because he is a 15-year-old that was, and when you've got a knife stuck in you, you don't really care whether the other end of it's held by a 15-year-old or a 50-year-old, do you?
No, that's right. And also when you look at teenagers, I mean, I'm not the tallest of people, so obviously most people are taller than me, but I've got a teenage daughter and a lot of her friends, they're big strapping lads. And I think, a man would have trouble, dealing with, especially in a situation where they're manic or they're angry. I think it's, some of them are as big as fully grown men. So I don't think it matters so much like that for age.
So
the time for thinking. Sorry. Go.
No, I was just gonna say. So he was 15 at the time of his arrest, right? So he was 14 at the first murder.
No, he's 15 at the time of the murders. He was 15 at the time of the murders,
and he was 16 at the time of arrest.
Yeah. No, it was a year later, but I don't know when his birthday was. So I believe he was still 15 when he was arrested.
So strange that those two crimes happened so close together. And then there was that, if it was always his intention to carry out more of these crimes in the way that you've mentioned, Colin, to kind of create a name for himself. It's so strange that there was that period of time where he was inactive, I suppose you might use that terminology.
Yeah. And there's no I don't know the answer to that.
School exams maybe, or something like that.
Well, you don't know. That's right. I mean, he did have a point there was something in his life. I think one of his grandparents died. I think his grandma died at some point, and that was something that was said to have had a big a big impact on him. But the other thing that you'll be interested to know, Casey, is that he was absolutely obsessed with serial killers. And he had, people say, oh, my favorite serial, which is, I think is bizarre, but my favorite serial killer is this guy. His favorite serial killer was Ted Bundy. He was a massive fan of Peter Sutcliffe, the Yorkshire Ripper, and he had been researching online when they went through his online records. He'd been searching serial killers, how they carried out their crimes, how they would get their sentences reduced, what to say in court. So I mean, this is something that this boy had been really, really interested in, to the point where it was obsessive. And he tried to, when he went to court, he attended Guildford Court and was charged with murder, but tried to appeal it, saying that he admits manslaughter on the ground of diminished responsibility, because he was hearing voices in his head, which is of course exactly what Peter Sutcliffe tried to do and failed, thankfully. And he was then researching online ways that if he was to be arrested, how could he get his crimes reduced? How could he get his sentence reduced? By going to court. He was ultimately found guilty and was convicted of both murders, and was detained on a life sentence with a minimum term of 27 years. So, I mean, he's 15. So 27 years later, I straight away thought, well, hang on, he's not going to be that, he's going to be like 40 something by the time he comes out. But when I was reading into it a bit more, it was like, he probably won't ever come out. It was just that it would be because he's a child, he can't be given a full life term. And I think that's a bit crazy.
Well, I think that's, where we've talked about how children, you may have thought I've said children shouldn't be treated any differently. I don't think children should be treated differently in an active, dynamic situation, if you like. They present just the same threat as an adult would do.
Yeah.
I think there are questions we can certainly ask ourselves as a society. How do children get to that position? How did that individual child get to that position? And when it comes to the sentencing, it's the same with every life sentence. There is a recommendation made, which is the minimum time to be served before an application for parole can be made. And I think the way, or the potential for a change between a person who's 15 to 42, as he would be in this case, is huge.
Yeah.
Whereas somebody over 27 years who's already an adult and has already formed, their adult sort of way of thinking and whatever, perhaps it's less easy to imagine that there'd be real progress and real rehabilitation. So I guess I don't have too much of a problem with that, as long as the structures around it, the processes around it at that time, 27 years hence, are such that the right decision is made. I think to give a child an opportunity to mature and grow and learn a lesson is perhaps something we ought to be comfortable with.
Now, with him being a child and this happening, if he does get released in 27 years or whenever, would he be eligible to receive the same protection that someone like John Venables received when he was released?
Well, that's a good question. My sense is to say no, because he's not had that protection so far. But I don't
that's
know.
really interesting. Actually, did they release his full name in the media and everything? Because usually with children, that wouldn't. Wow. Okay. So of course, then what you're saying about the protection of identity and the naming of the minors and things. Wow, that's a really interesting point.
What you should also bear in mind as well is that anybody who is released from a life sentence on parole after whatever time that they've served is always on license for the rest of their life.
Oh, okay. Right.
They can be recalled, not even for a conviction. They can be recalled, if they're living their life in a way which is incompatible with the terms of that license. But certainly any conviction from any crime makes them liable to be recalled to prison at any time. So there is that kind of backstop for it as well.
Isn't that stranger when you look at the James Bolger case and you look at what those two lads did to Jamie Bolger, and then you look at this case where this guy is equally as horrific, and there's two victims. The fact that the two lads got anonymity and got let out and they were given new identities, but then this guy, that it's totally different, and that he was named in the, you know, in the press, and then, you know, he'll be let out on license, but he still hasn't got that anonymity that they were given, and he was a child the same.
It's a very good point.
Funny how that's worked. Yeah, it's funny how that's worked like that.
I'll confess, it's a point I never thought of while we were making the film on this program. It never occurred to me, why do we know his name? But you're absolutely right.
Yeah, it's strange, isn't it? Well, I mean, when you watch the episode, it's quite unlikely he would be on the streets again. But obviously, like Colin said, if he goes through, I mean, we've spoken with our friend Dr. Das about rehabilitation. We talked about like Charles Bronson and the fact that he's coming up for possible release, and the fact that, you know, most people will be like, what? But when you actually look into the crimes that Charles Bronson did, they're actually not as horrific as some other people that, you know, they're coming up for release. And he's been in prison for all this time. When you actually look into it, and speaking to our friend Shahom, the rehabilitation question always comes up. Can somebody who's committed a violent crime like this, not once but twice, can they be rehabilitated as going in as a 15-year-old? By the time they're 40 something, can they be rehabilitated onto the right path? And that's a huge, I know that's a huge discussion, that you have that a lot in the true crime circles. Is it a rehabilitation in prison, or are they going to come out and the public are worried that he's going to do it again? It's a very tough one, I think, that one.
I have to say, it's a question that I'm really glad I never had to put my mind to. You know, that's all. Yeah. After we do our job, somebody else has to decide that, thankfully, because I think it's you know, there are so many competing things that you can think of, and competing ideas, and I don't actually know what I think, you know, so generally, let alone an individual case. So yeah,
I agree with you. I'm really on the fence on that one. I'm not actually sure, because obviously when you look at the James Bulger case, one of the two offenders has towed the line and has been very good since, but the other one has been in trouble a lot and been back to prison and then let out again and then been in trouble again. But so with that case, one has actually reformed and sorted his life out, but the other one not so much. And it's going to be an individual case thing. I think you'd have to look at it individually.
I think the important thing for the public and all that is to have transparency as to the decision making. You know, we've seen some parole decisions over the last few years. Primarily, I would suppose Colin Pitchfork, who was released.
Yeah. Oh my God.
Reoffended and was taken back, or lived his life in the wrong way, and was taken back as well. And then also John Warboys, of course, who was going to be released, but we managed to get around that. And you know, you can never trust what politicians say, can you? But there seems to be moves afoot to make that process more open and more challengeable, I suppose, because I think up until pretty recently, the parole board's been pretty much aligned to itself and has made its decisions, and there's no way of kind of really looking behind those or really challenging them, and that's the place where we are now.
That's a job I wouldn't like. I wouldn't like to be on a parole board. I don't think I'd like that responsibility.
They probably wouldn't want me on it anyway.
I suppose as well, there's that whole discussion around somebody at 15 who's at a vulnerable stage of brain development, you know, and you'd hope that their brain would develop in a positive way going forward, Colin, as you've mentioned, to the point where they're eligible for release, or at least considered to be eligible for release. But then if you're surrounded by a certain type of person within the judicial system, within the penal system, you know, who's to say that somebody wouldn't have been rehabilitated or reformed in a certain way if they weren't around certain individuals? So it really is kind of like that impossible circle, and there's so much to consider. Yeah.
Can we be certain that our prison system actually is the right place to rehabilitate and to make that change on a 15-year-old's brain?
Yeah.
I wouldn't like to say, but I'd have my doubts. I have to, you know, senses to doubt it.
Yeah, it's crazy. So many questions.
Now, Colin, when you reviewed James Fairweather's interview and his confessions, was there anything that you were able to pull from that could explain his mindset or who he was as a person, at least at that time? Was it something, or were there things that you noticed that you could point to, you know, any other offender that you said, you know what, that really sounds like this person that we had interviewed?
No, not the latter. Not anybody that I personally came across, because the people, I guess I dealt with two murderers who killed more than one person on different occasions, and both of those, well, one of them was Belfield, who refused to talk to us anyway, and still says he didn't do anything, and the other one was so completely unwell, mentally unwell, that there wasn't any hope really of getting anything sensible or telling out of him. When I saw James Fairweather's, I just kind of, I think I said it earlier, it just seemed to me that this was somebody who was so matter of fact, who really thought he was just going through a part of the process that he expected, and that he'd kind of maybe even rehearsed in his mind. This is how it's going to go, and that the disappointment was not that he'd been caught, but they'd been caught so quickly before he could kill some more.
Yeah,
because he had like 15 in mind, didn't he? It was 15 people he had in mind. That
I think he
wanted
to beat Sutcliffe. He thought Sutcliffe was his kind of hero, his favorite serial killer, as you put it, and he planned to beat him. And it's a really, I mean, there's just so many kind of philosophical questions on this, because somebody who thinks like that is clearly not normal. So, they're clearly not well, are they?
No.
So then you should say, well, okay, if they're not normal and they're not well, then should we actually hold them to the same standard as somebody who is normal? You just get into this sort of philosophical question, which is why I was quite glad to really be dealing with families and with evidence and forensics, and leave all that sort of thinking about the why. And people, it's interesting, it's probably shocked some of the sort of true crime people. I've said many times before, I'm rarely concerned about motive. Actually, most of the murders that I've investigated, the why wasn't relevant. We needed to find out the how, and the when, and the who. And sometimes if you've got nothing else, then going to the why might be able to point you in the direction of the who. But if you can get the who and the how some other way, the why really
doesn't really matter, I suppose. Yeah. Well, I mean, the police looked into Fairweather's background, obviously into his home life, and he didn't really have a bad home life. I mean, at school, he had told people he wanted to be a serial killer, and that was obviously very odd. But he was bullied at school because he had quite big ears, so he was bullied at school. But his home life was fine. It wasn't as if he came from the background of something where it was always in trouble. He wasn't really in trouble very often, and his family didn't report him hearing any voices or having any mental issues, because obviously somebody who does hear voices and stuff, it doesn't just click like that and there they are, all of a sudden they're hearing these voices. It's a matter of lots of different things lead up to this, and before they get more and more unwell. But with him, he had researched online what's going to get me my sentence reduced, and then all of a sudden he's like, oh no, but I'm hearing voices, they're telling me to do it. And it's almost like Colin said, like he's rehearsed this. He knew eventually he'd be arrested. And it's like this is a matter in the process of me killing all these people. I'm going to get arrested at one point. This is what I'm going to say. And I think that's quite, he's obviously done a lot of preparation for that. And for a 15-year-old, that's crazy.
I'm interested to know because with Colin, you said that he was very matter of fact in his interview. I really wonder if he's on the spectrum at all. Because it does
I think he was, I think he was actually. They did say that he was, because he had been assessed by lots of expert witnesses and stuff. But they said that although he was slightly on the autistic spectrum, it was nothing that would. It wasn't anything that would, contribute to that. It wasn't something that was a massive factor.
Interesting.
Yeah, he was. I mean, he was. Everybody's probably on the spectrum to some degree or other, aren't they? I don't know, and that's why it's a spectrum. But he was. I think there was no indication that he wasn't able to live an ordinary functioning life as an ordinary 15-year-old. And that's in some ways that's what makes this all the more shocking. If there had been a history of the need for interventions and saying I'm hearing voices, I'm being told to do awful things, and what have you. Then, well, maybe the interventions would have stopped it, but there wasn't any of it. It just came out of the blue,
It sounds quite similar to some of the cases, I suppose, you hear about mass shooters and people who sit at home in very isolated spaces online. You know, the QAnon movement has a lot of offline harm that's starting to appear in America as well, with that sort of, you know, sitting in corners of the internet, as you said, researching certain things. And I wonder if he'd mentioned to his peers at school that he was interested in serial killers as a subject, if he mentioned that to his parents, and when these crimes happened, if his parents had any kind of inkling or indication that maybe he was involved, because I feel like parental instinct is a real thing. So that would be interesting to know as well.
I don't actually know. I mean, I know I read, as I think Joe has, that he mentioned at school that he wanted to be a serial killer. I kind of assumed that was to his peers. I kind of assumed if you said it to the careers officer, they might tell something. I don't know, but so I assume that's to his friends. But then, you know, how many can you remember? It's a long time ago. I was 15, but mates would say really odd things sometimes about what they wanted to do, you know, or people you knew. So, do you have to take everyone seriously? You know, are we saying there's a duty on kids to report everything their mates say that are far-fetched?
Yeah, that's right. It's funny. I mean, if you think back to when you were at school, there's always somebody at school that you think was a bit odd, or there's somebody that perhaps, you know, is very quiet and stuff like that. I wonder if that was the same for him. I wonder if he was, you know, the quiet kid that was, you know, bullied at school or whatever, and that, you know, that's just come out and people have just gone, oh, whatever, that was a stupid thing to say, and not actually thought anything of it. So it's quite interesting to see if that was the case. So so that was the case that we thought we would chat with Colin about today.
This one is there's something creepy about this. Like, I mean, especially with there not being a motive besides I just want to do this. There's just something about that just gives me chills. And it's easier to understand if someone like Casey, you mentioned school shooting, and as we're kind of talking about this, I was thinking about Kip Kinkle, who he was Thurston High School. This is back in the late 90s. He was 15. But the difference with him in his case is he shot his parents and went to school and started shooting up school. Was he was worried because he got suspended, right? And he was like, I embarrassed my family, and they won't be able to live their lives now because I'm an embarrassment, so I'm gonna kill him. But like with this one, there's nothing besides I just want to do it.
Yeah,
it's scary that there are people out there that do it for no other reasons than.
I suppose it's like sitting at home as well on your computer on your own, researching all of that stuff, you know, where no one can see you and nobody knows really what thoughts are forming in your mind. There's a kind of darkness around that as well, which I think because we don't understand it, it makes it interesting for us, but also, you know, sinister and scary as well, that people can sit at home and formulate these plans and ideas.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Thankfully, it doesn't happen very often, so that's a really good thing.
No, I guess no, it doesn't serial killer, but you know, I guess you know, kids do stupid things. You know, they do stupid things to animals, or they smash up a bus shelter or a phone kiosk. Or, you know, they do things that they know are wrong because they just want to do them. But thankfully, that's not often a serial murder, but that was what happened here.
Yeah.
Colin, do you think in this day and age it's tougher for serial murders to occur?
Yeah, I think it probably is. I think I talked about this at CrimeCon actually. There was I forget the name of the topic, but it was like something like has DNA put serial killers out of business? And I came back at that with has DNA put detectives out of business? Which is kind of a hobby horse of mine. And I think there's much more there. There's much more in terms of DNA, in terms of scientific advances, CCTV, communications data, automatic number plate recognition, you know, all the things that we know
so much
that we use. There's so much there. But if you're really putting your mind to it, all those are things that can somehow be circumvented, particularly the DNA. And that was my point, was that if we have a generation, and we're getting very close to that, of having a generation of detectives who have only ever known a world where there was DNA identification, and they are upon it, certainly in the UK, the Crown Prosecution Service and the courts are so reliant on it. You now get to the stage where if you don't have DNA in a case, like we didn't in Belfield's case, because he was clever enough not to leave, the counsel have to lay out to the jury in terms, in plain speech at the beginning, there is not DNA in this case. And that doesn't mean anything, because they know that everybody sitting on that jury has had a diet of CSI and of Dexter and of all the other things we know about scientific work. And so my fear is, we know that it's possible to do things without leaving DNA if you take the right precautions. If you've got a core of detectives who can only really work if they've got DNA, that's scary. That opens opportunities.
Yeah, very scary. Yeah,
almost works in favor of those committing the types of crimes where where they don't leave DNA.
And interesting. Sorry,
no, go on. Sorry,
it's interesting enough. I won't. One of the things that I've been doing earlier this year was doing some training inputs for a foreign police force, and it's exactly on that basis that the officers that were designing the course, who were British, knew about Belfield, knew about the fact that we didn't have DNA in it, and what they wanted to deliver to this police force was, there is still a place for old-fashioned detective work, if you like, pre-DNA stuff of talking to witnesses, taking statements, getting eyewitnesses, piecing together cases and circumstantial evidence. Now, it's a very small foreign police force that have had that foresight, but I think that's how it should be. I think there's a real danger that we put too much reliance on these new techniques and we lose the old ones. There's an element of de-skilling, and we might be
actual detective work you're losing, isn't it? You're losing the actual detective work.
And that's not to decry the current crop of detectives, because they do what they're forced to do and what's available to them. But I just think it would be a mistake to put all our eggs in the DNA / scientific basket.
Yeah. Morgan, do you remember the case we did of Deborah Lindsley when she was on the train? Do you remember?
Yeah,
and I sent you over the crime scene photos.
Yes.
And this was a lady who was in a single carriage, Casey, and her body was found. She was killed in this carriage, and there was nothing. Obviously, this was back in the day. It was old style policing, and the crime scene photos have actually got detectives like kneeling in all the evidence, and they've got like cigarettes in their mouths, and they haven't got any gloves on. And we were looking back at it and looking at the crime, we were just like, oh my god, there's people like traipsing in and out of the blood in the bottom of the carriage, and we were like, oh my god, look at all the evidence they're walking in. How the hell are they going to ever find anybody? And the CCTV was so old, there was nothing.
The train itself is probably so cross-contaminated across all of the areas as well, that even if the protocol was followed in the way you'd hope it would be today, that even then there's no absolute that you're going to find any linking DNA in that type of case. Public space is really tough like that. I remember saying to my dad, we were watching something years and years ago, and I was only young, and I remember saying, why don't they just take the fingerprints off of the telephone? And my dad was like, Casey, that's a telephone box. There are thousands of fingerprints on the phone. And that was the first time it had occurred to me. So yeah, wow, that's really, really interesting.
The thing is, it's all of its own age, and things move more quickly now, perhaps, accelerated. But it wasn't that long ago that we were doing forensic retrieval work in murder scenes without hairnets, without masks. Pre-low copy number DNA, there was never thought to be any problem with that. But because the techniques for retrieving it and for growing it, if you like, and getting a profile became so sensitive, well, we had to react by making sure that we took even more care not to contaminate. So you can look at things like that and think, oh God, that's really, but there are detectives out there now who would look at me and my team doing something 10 years ago, 15 years ago, and say, oh, did they really do that back in 2004? You know, so it's just progress, isn't it? It's just how it goes on.
That's amazing. You must have seen so much change in procedure and protocol throughout your career in how things are expected to be done. And years ago, where there wasn't really as much DNA to be collected in these cases that could be used in samples, you know, you wouldn't need a hairnet. You wouldn't need to be treating the crime scene in a certain way if you weren't trying to collect, because things couldn't be tested years and years ago. So you must be able to remember points in your career where certain technologies actually came into existence that just didn't exist before in the way that we know them to exist now.
I remember part of my SIO training in the late 90s up in Wakefield in Yorkshire, when I first heard about low copy number DNA. And it was pointed out to us that even something like the mortuary slab, where post-mortems are taken, the need there was going to have to be to clean or not reuse and have disposable instruments and things like that, because the contamination could bleed through from 2, 3, 4, 5, 10 post-mortems before. And that just hadn't been a thing, hadn't been a problem. Now it is. And now there are measures taken, you know. It's progress. Wow. I'm not a dinosaur.
Amazing, yeah. I'm not a dinosaur. I could talk to you all day about this, Colin. It's brilliant. Thank you so much for coming on. And
when I finish my next bout of filming and stuff, and then perhaps towards the end of the year next year, I'll come back in and we'll talk about something else. I'd love to.
I'd love that. That would be amazing. Thank you. I must tell you, I did have a dream that we did a TV show together. It was called The Podcaster and the Policeman, and we investigated a cold case. And I woke up after, and I was like, you know, when you sometimes wake up and go, no, that wasn't
it was just going to finish.
And I was like, didn't find out what happened, and woke up and I was just like, oh, and I messaged Morgan, I was like, I've just had the best dream. Me and Colin's son had a TV program together. And he's like, you're so crazy.
As I said earlier, don't ever ask yourself how it's going to happen. Just dream it and want it.
We'll be together in September, won't we? In a few weeks' time.
Will. Oh, yeah, we will.
Sorry, Morgan, we will miss you.
What's that, Glasgow? Or
we'll all be together in Glasgow.
Yeah.
So we'll all be there. We can have catch-up drinks and talk more about.
Yeah.
That would be so nice.
You still owe me that amaretto.
I do.
Yeah. The lights went out.
They did, yeah. We couldn't get to the bar this time, so yeah, I'm definitely.
It made me as a mini bar, and the rest of the night was a blur.
I'm taking Colin to the pub, and I'm gonna give him the Disaronno and Coke. Have you ever had that, Casey?
That is actually my favorite, my go-to drink. Yeah,
mine too. Yeah. So I promise, Colin, I'm taking him for one of those.
Yes. Let me just tell you this very quickly. I did a podcast, not a crime podcast, but a podcast with somebody who just asked me, and it was in Liverpool. It was quite good fun. And he had a thing where he gave each of his guests a rider. So the rider wasn't particularly good. You couldn't sort of order lots of food and clothes and things like that, but you could have whatever you wanted to drink while you were there with him. And he would drink one of the same. So I thought, what's the most horrible thing I've ever had? And that was there's something in Germany I had, which they called a Dr. Jäger, which is basically Jägermeister with Dr. Pepper. And it is like drinking molten plastic, really. You know, it's so synthetic tasting. He actually quite liked it, the guy that I did it with.
No.
I did make him do one, and we both sat there and drank one. So yeah. So
that is brilliant.
Cherry, what's the worst thing you've ever drinking? You've ever drank?
Me, the worst thing I've ever drank.
Come on.
But I don't like whiskey. No. The worst thing ever was in Vegas. CrimeCon Vegas is the worst drink I've ever had. It was a drink. You drink it and then you eat this flour and you chew the flour and then you drink the rest. You drink the rest of the drink and it changes the taste of the drink. Nancy and us and Mike, there was a few of us that did it. LaDonna, we were all sat there and she said, Nancy was like, are you sure about this, Cherry? And I said, no. apparently it's amazing. Apparently it's really, really good. So we all got this drink. We all drank it, and it was quite nice when we first drank it.
Yeah.
Then I've got video evidence of this. We all started chewing this flower, and it was like chewing stinging nettles. It like made your mouth go numb. And then when you drink, you know, like if you eat licorice, when you eat something else, it doesn't taste the same. It was like that. When you drink the next part of the drink, it was awful. It was awful. But I've got a picture of a video of Nancy just like chewing on this flower, still chewing and chewing and chewing this flower for ages. You ask her about that drink when you see her. Yeah. You ask her about the flower drink.
And didn't we pay like $25 for that? Those
they were like $25 each drink.
Oh gosh,
not worth the $25.
No,
really not.
Can I ask Morgan a question before we go?
Yeah.
Is that a Middlesbrough scarf behind you?
No, it's Wrexham.
What is it? Wrexham? Oh, right. Okay. I couldn't see. It looked a bit like a Middlesbrough scarf, but okay, no, that's fine. I've got nothing to say. Morgan's sister
lives in Manchester. What does she live in? Oldham? Is it Oldham your sister lives?
Huh? Bolton?
Is it Oldham? Bolton.
No,
that was it. Bolton.
Yeah.
And when he came over for CrimeCon, he's got to go himself a Wrexham scarf.
Isn't Wrexham owned by Ryan Reynolds?
Yeah, it is. Yeah, it is.
That's so bizarre. Yeah. That's so bizarre.
I'm a rugby fan, so I have no idea about all this.
We could make a good quiz team, I think, actually, Casey. That was very good. I'm impressed with that. Only because that question was in a quiz I did recently. We couldn't think of who it was.
You should have had Casey on the team.
We'll get the chance in September. Me and Cherry might have to be forced. I mean, we probably would have anyway, onto the same table because if there's pizza, I can't have milk and Cherry can't have gluten. So we'll be kind of on the allergy table.
We're on the weirdo table.
But speaking of Fairweather was at school. No, it wasn't. Anyway.
Probably. It will be set on our table.
Thanks ever
so much. It's nice to see you. Thank you so much for coming on. Thank you very much. We'll see you in September.
Bye. Bye, Casey.
Bye, Colin. Bye.
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 Okay. Well,
my heart is full. That's the best episode we've ever had.
Oh, Cherry, that's so lovely to hear you say that.
I absolutely adore. That was absolutely so much fun. I've really enjoyed having you on and having Colin on. It's been really lovely. Thank you so much for joining us.
Oh, it's been great. I think it's good to celebrate milestones and birthdays. The podcasting stuff is tough sometimes, subject matter aside. So it's nice to be able to have these opportunities to recognize the work that we've done and to get together with friends and just have a nice chit chat. Thank you so much for thinking of me for your 2-year anniversary. I feel absolutely honored to have been asked to come and join you.
We've just had a message on our feed. Dennis Stewart, I'm traveling to Colorado for the Alan Lee Phillips trial for the Schnee and Oberholzer murders. So he's actually on his way. Oh, Dennis, keep us up to date with what's happening. I'd love to know what's happening because I don't think it's going to be televised. So I would be happy if you would keep us up to date with what's happening at the time. I hope it goes the way we hope it's going to go. And
that's such a great community. People getting in touch to keep you updated with stuff.
Oh, it's we're so lucky because we do have a lot of people that keep us up to date with cases that we've covered, and particularly if they live in the area. Obviously, especially if me being over here, unless you look it up, sometimes you can't actually see updates on things because we're in England. So we do have some really lovely listeners that will message and say, hey, did you guys see this has happened in the case that you did? And we can go back and have a look at it. We do have it quite a bit. So it's really...
I love that.
Thank you, Dennis. Dennis has said I will. I'll keep you updated. Thank you. I really appreciate that.
Dennis, do you know when the trial starts? By chance?
It's on his way, so it must be soon. Tomorrow's Monday, so it must be tomorrow.
Oh.
Wow.
Maybe it's
sorry, I cut you off as well when you were talking about another person who had written into your chat as well.
No, it's Sherlyn. She's one of our long-term listeners. She's a big support to us and she's absolutely lovely and I love her. So just saying hello to her. Hope you're really well.
I love that. Morgan, how do you feel about reaching the 2-year milestone? It's a pretty big accomplishment.
It is. It doesn't feel like it's been 2 years.
It doesn't.
No, not at all.
You look good with that scarf on. It suits you as well.
I'm trying to get him in a rugby rugby shirt rather than football, but I'm still convincing him on that.
It's the stash. It's a stash in the scarf.
You look like an old school English football supporter, like from way back in the day.
What was that football? Was it Jimmy Greaves? He looks a bit like Jimmy Greaves.
I have no idea.
Yeah, a little bit. Yeah.
Just Google Jimmy Greaves now. Google Jimmy Greaves, and that's who you remind me of. Just have a look and see.
Rugby is quite big in Wrexham, isn't it? In Wales, in Wrexham. So why? I mean, you could find him a Wrexham rugby shirt.
Yeah, we could. He was sending me. Actually, he was sending me. He did just sending me pictures of rugby shirts while he was there.
What's the name of the Sports Direct? Right, that's a big.
Yeah, he was a Sports Direct. Yeah,
I was in a Sports Direct in Wrexham, and I was taking pictures of all the Welsh rugby jerseys.
Oh,
I was asking her what size she wanted.
Wow, you really made the most of your time over here, going to all the little places. It looked great, and you were taking us on a little tour through your Instagram as well. Like, I'm in Southport.
Yeah.
Yeah. All places that you definitely should visit when you come to England.
I think so. I love the little seaside places, but I grew up in the seaside, so I mean, I know that that's where you are as well, Cherry. So my mum and dad were sending me videos of them, during the heat wave. They were just going down to the beach and just going in the water for 5 minutes. And I was just like up here in Liverpool, like, it's so hot and I can't breathe. And my mum and dad were like, it was a lovely dip in the North Sea.
I feel bad.
Thanks, mum and dad.
I feel all the bad for all the people in Southport if they want to go into the ocean, because it was like miles away. Like I was on this pier and it was still like 10 miles away or whatever.
It does do that up here sometimes. Yeah. On the Merseyside beaches as well, it does that, which you don't get down south. The southeast coast I'm talking about, not kind of down where you are, Cherry, but the water was just kind of right there, which we've always you take it for granted until you're not there anymore, and then you're like,
do. I mean, I grew up in the southeast. So I remember going to the beach with my family was like a 3-hour trip when I was growing up. And then when you got there, the sea might be right out anyway. So you don't, there's no way to do it. Otherwise you just don't get a day out. But here where I live now, the beaches, there's lots of beaches within like 10-minute drive. And usually they're pretty good. Dennis has just said, Morgan, Dennis has just said he's going to see Charlie McCormack tomorrow. So I'll tell him you guys said hello. Give our love to Charlie, Dennis. Thank you. I love Charlie. He was a detective on a case that we did. And he got given the case when it was all boxes and basically loose bits of paper. Wow. And that's how we started this case. And it's over 40 years, isn't it? The case.
It is
over 40 years old. And they've just now, through familial DNA, have arrested somebody and charged someone with the murders of these 2 girls. So I'm hopeful that this is going to give Charlie, the detective, an answer, because he's very.
I suppose that's the other side of DNA. The other side is all of these historic cases that are able to be closed thanks to
I hope so. Yeah.
DNA. Wow. So can I ask you one question before I go as well? I'm just interested to hear from the two of you if you have any plans for the future of the podcast, anything you definitely want to achieve, or anything you definitely want to put into the show, or are you just going to carry on with the way that you are until you get to year 3 and 200 episodes?
Yeah.
Well, obviously the podcast from the policeman is obviously going to be in the pipeline now.
Yeah.
I want to be Colin Sutton's sidekick. I know every true crime podcaster is in love with him, but let me just say I loved him first.
That's so funny, because there's a cult expert called Janja Lalich, and everybody's like, and I said to her when she came on my 12-hour live stream, which I never thought that, she would agree to interview with me, but we've spoken a few times now, and she really endorses the podcast. And sometimes if I have a question, she'll write lengthy email responses explaining things to me. And she's published books, and she really is kind of like a leading expert in the field of cult education. So I said to her, you're going to be retiring in the next few years. Have you considered taking on a protege? And then everybody else was like, no, because we're next in line. I was like, okay.
You're like, get out the way.
But she's kind of like, I suppose she's kind of, to me, my version of Colin Sutton, because her work is just absolutely incredible in the field. So it's exciting for me to watch you interact with Colin Sutton, and then think about kind of, how I think and feel about Yanya as an individual as well.
It's very funny because obviously I had to keep myself from getting too excited. This is like my true crime hero. And actually, because I love the way Colin thinks. I love the way, that's what really made me really interested in him in the first place, is his train of thought and how he and there's probably other, obviously other detective chief inspectors that are the same, but just the way Colin is, and the fact that he's very approachable. He has no qualms about sitting with you and explaining things through to you until you understand it. And I can see how he would be a brilliant boss. I can see how he's just a generally really nice guy. And he's always been like that. I mean, even when he's really busy, he's just a really lovely man. And I find him absolutely fascinating. Like, I just think he's a really fascinating guy. And so it's not just because obviously he's done these massive cases. It's just generally, I just think he treats everybody the same, whether you are Paul Holes or whether you are just visiting CrimeCon as an ordinary person like us, and I just think he's just a really, really nice guy. So I know, bless him. So move over morbidology. You can't have him. He belongs to me. No, I'm just joking.
So what do you think, Morgan? Do you have some plans or are they kind of things that you're keeping under wraps until you're gonna announce them to your community?
Yeah, we have things that are in play.
Exciting.
Yeah,
great.
But we can't talk about them yet because we're under non-disclosure agreements.
Oh, right. Okay. Right. I see.
You might be able to feel it. Yeah.
No, we have some exciting stuff going on. I mean, I think really for the future, I don't know. I'm just having fun. I enjoy it. And I enjoy getting my weekly time with Cherry. Talk about true crime. What'd you say?
So bless you.
Oh, no, I don't know. So, I mean, the future for us is we're just gonna keep going on, and when opportunities knock, we're gonna take them.
Yep, as Colin said, that's what you've got to do. You've just got to keep going with it, going with the flow.
Yeah. That's right. Don't worry about it, and it'll come. If it's meant to be, it'll happen. There's a few things that we've got going on. There's a few things that we'd like to do more of. Obviously sometimes it's time restraints that we can't, and for us, obviously you've got the whole time difference as well, so quite a lot of the time when things happen here, it's middle of the night there, so that's also that's also something that we have to take into consideration with doing podcasting and stuff for us. But I think it would be really good to be more involved in, for me, my passion is cold cases, and old cold cases. I would really like to do a lot more work on that if we get the opportunity to. I think because of like you said earlier, because of all the technology that we've got now, I think that we could use that technology in some old cases that we might now be able to help a lot more with them, because particularly we did a case about a young girl that was killed in Windsor, and it's one that's really, really stuck in my mind. And that one, a lot of the stuff has been, it's not allowed to be released into the public domain for like 75 years or something.
Oh my goodness, you told me about this when we were in London. Wow.
So that particular case, I would like to be able to use some of the technology we've got now to be able to go back and look at that case again, because I think Christine Butcher, I think she deserves just, but like all the police officers that were on that case and now probably all gone. They're probably all dead, because I mean, this was like, a long time ago, and they were adults at the time that they were investigating this, and so now they would be in their 90s, if not already gone. And so her parents have all gone, a lot of her family have all gone, and I feel like there's no one really championing that kind of stuff for her. And I don't know why she's particularly as one of those ones that stuck with me. But I would like to get justice for her.
Same thing with like the Grieve sisters, who were two sisters.
Grime sisters.
Yeah, the Grime sisters. Yeah. They were in
Chicago.
Was like,
that's the same for you. Yeah.
Like in the late about the same time as the other case, where the family members are no longer, like parents are no longer around, siblings. I think there might be like one sibling left. It'd just be nice to get get that solved for them.
Oh gosh, I don't know how you work with unsolved cases all of the time. I would just be too frustrated. Of course there must be the times where there are updates and things, and you get some movement in the cold cases where they might come back into the forefront for investigators and stuff, but the majority of the time I imagine you're all just left wondering where they are or what happened or where their body is or who committed the crime. I couldn't do that. I am not the type of person that likes things to be unresolved, so
I'm exactly the same. I'd like all the pieces to be put together so you have a who, what, where, when, why, how, and so especially that's why cases like that really frustrate me, because I think I want to know why, I want to know who, I want to know how, I want that person to be able to rest, and I think with those we have now started to do though a Crimepedia case solved, haven't we, every month, because there are lots of people who have said to us, would you ever do one that's solved so that we can get an ending? And I've said, well, yeah, we'll do that. So we now once a month we do a solved one on Patreon, so that
it's good for your soul as well, case. Like a catharsis as well.
Got him. Yeah.
See, I don't know what's worse. I don't know what's worse, the unsolved cold cases or the cases of, typically women who have been in relationships that have been victims of domestic violence, and then they end up quote unquote killing themselves. But you
quite obviously don't.
Yeah, they obviously don't. I don't know. Those ones are tough. We have a few of those. I think I've done a few of those where I did two, which are very similar, where the boyfriend,
like almost identical. Identical.
Where the boyfriend was with the victim at the time of death, and then they both left the scene and didn't report the crime until later.
It's tricky. A lot of that comes down to coercion as well. So we have laws around coercion in intimate partnerships in the UK, but that doesn't extend to groups and movements and religions. So when you're talking about domestic violence and domestic abuse, there is the case for coercion over here in the UK. So that law doesn't exist in America at all at the moment. And there's pushes for it to be recognized on a group basis. So groups and cults and destructive movements can be shut down by law. But then in America, you need to start with the intimate partnerships and then roll it out as well into groups. But then when you think about states like Utah, which are basically religious states, whether you want to say it or not, that are run by Mormon police departments and run by Mormon judicial systems. It's impossible to ever imagine a world where the coercion laws would even make a difference in certain parts of America. So there's just so much to consider with all of it. It really is interesting. But as you said there, did the women ever actually do that themselves? Because even if they did, what pushed them to make that decision, and was it ever actually their own decision to do that, if you're talking about coercion and domestic abuse? So I'm gonna dip out, but thank you both so much for inviting me here. I've had such a lovely time. I feel
thank you so much.
I'm going to leave you two to be with your community. And Cherry, I'll see you in a few weeks. And Morgan, I'll chat to you online.
Yep, absolutely.
Congratulations. Bye.
Bye.
All right, Cherry.
Oh, that was so much fun. I've got a dumb criminal for you.
Oh, I have one too. Let's both do them.
We got carried away talking, but I'm going to give you a really fun dumb criminal.
Okay, so let's do what we normally do, and let's do a little dumb criminal.
Okay. Now, this man has been dubbed South Africa's dumbest criminal. Okay. Because his name was Thomas. I can't even spell his surname. Ngobo, let's just say. He was 40 years old. Okay. He was on the run for 7 years. Okay. He's wanted for stealing hardware products that were worth more than £1,000. Okay. He was meant to deliver them to his clients, and he didn't. He diverted them to another address and stole them all. Okay. Now, he's known as the dumbest criminal because he walked into a police station to check on his application to join the police force.
Oh no.
That made me laugh so much. I was like, what? So he's on the run. He's been on the run for 7 years, and he pops into a police station to check on his application to join the force. Because I just thought, what? Oh my god! So that was my dumb criminal for this week. It just made me chuckle, and I thought I would bring that one up. I thought it was funny. So
all right. So my dumb criminal.
Mm-hmm.
You ready for this? Okay. Now, let's be honest. People, carjacking is probably I don't know. Don't carjack people, okay? But if you're going to carjack people, make sure you know who you're carjacking before you're carjacking, okay?
Yeah.
So this was back in March. This was March 19th, 2022. Two officers this was in St. Louis. Two officers had responded to reports of gunfire when a man stepped in front of their car, then walked to the passenger side and pointed the gun at the officers. Now, the man who was trying to carjack these two officers ran off once he realized that the car was a marked police car.
A marked police car.
So on the side it says police. So he ran off, and they ended up arresting a man after a search and found him carrying a gun. Now, no one was injured in the incident. Now, prosecutors decided to refuse to file charges against the man for the attempted carjacking, but they did give him he was charged on first-degree robbery, armed criminal action, and resisting arrest.
Oh my god, what an idiot! I love it. I love our dumb criminals. Great fun. Great fun. Well done.
Don't do that.
Don't be dumb, people. Don't be dumb. Well, thank you so much for joining us on our 100th episode. Thank you if you've been with us from the beginning, and thank you if you've just joined us and just found our podcast. We appreciate all the support that we get from you, and we couldn't do it without you guys. All of your reviews that you give us, and they push us up the podcasting charts, and we're really proud of what we've done over the last 2 years. So thank you very, very much for listening. We do appreciate it. And for now, be nice.
And bye.
You've said that like 200 times. Oh, so much